AV, line them up.
Part of the challenge is that when you are raised as a child, educated as a student, and formed as an adult within such a colonial-based society, the cultural norms of that society become your reality, even your character. Such norms become your basis for what is real, true, and right, and anyone or anything that goes against these norms are deemed offensive, evil, and even criminal. This is where we come to the words nigger, nigga, and negro, because it is by looking closely at these words, among other words like savage, primitive, native, and barbarian, that we begin to see what is being done to us, all of us, through institutional racism. Normally, I would see no reason to write or speak such an exhaustive explanation of something as blatant as institutional racism, or even as simple as our word nigger. But with all of the debate over the use of the terms nigga, nigger, and negro, you would think someone would have asked a real nigga what a real nigga is, and why use the term nigga at all? But most people, led by emotion and their own life experiences, have simply deemed the words nigger, nigga, and negro as derogatory to black people simply because of how some white people have used the same words and sounds. Having been emotionally affected by the sounds nigga, nega, nigger, and negro, many so-called intellectuals have dismissed the explanations of those calling themselves niggers, regardless of any factual explanation on our part. It is here, however, that we begin to see the real effects of the type of institutional racism our study, in its book form, explores. Here, with a sober and critical mind, it becomes obvious that if our criticizers were really interested in our coded dialect, they would have simply asked a real nigga what nigga meant or means to us, and why anyone, in light of white American racism and the history of slavery, would call herself or himself nigga. But no one is asking niggas anything, and even when asked or inquired about, the real answers of real niggas are always ignored or discredited, as if there is some kind of a social standard that we are not coming up to regarding ourselves. The general premise being that there must be something wrong with you to identify yourself as nigga. This, however, is a direct effect of institutional racism, where it is just understood culturally that young, unseasoned blacks have nothing to say or to offer American or African American society other than what these societies deem beneficial to themselves. While other cultures of people embrace the linguistic innovations of their children, black kids are constantly criticized for not coming up to the linguistic standards of white American society and speech. This critique, however, is clearly an example of a mind completely immersed in colonial cultural thinking, and points to a long-standing colonial cultural tradition where the very intelligence of young blacks is systematically policed or corrected or outright ignored, but never accepted as it is. Such one-way imperialistic ways of thinking create environments where the colonized are not allowed to freely create, express, or describe themselves for themselves and be accepted and respected as whatever they have presented themselves as. In a colonial society, all learning is one way, colonizer to the colonized. The very existence and self-expression of the colonized are always rejected, criticized, and demeaned by colonial educators and their students, many of whom claim to be African American intellectuals, teachers, and researchers. This is where our study begins. It begins with the ways in which we see ourselves as a people and why. Here, in this study, we will learn that as a black people speaking English, it is not one or two words that are degrading us as a people. It is the very English language itself that is degrading us as a people. And I say this respectful of the English language and of English people. Be clear, This is not a criticism of Britain or the English people. This is an inquiry into the lingering effects of institutional racism and how the words nigger and Negro have actually become such offensive words in English language. For the last 15 years, I've been traveling around the world, talking to scholars and collecting rare books and artifacts pertaining to this study, the study of a forgotten black people whose real history and identity has been distorted and hidden behind such terms as nigger and Negro, even primitive and savage. What I discovered was a lingering conspiracy within white American culture to historically hide, discredit, and ignore certain kinds of rebellious Africans in white American history, in a further effort to hide the real effects of white imperialist crimes against our black indigenous humanity. The whole foundational premise as to how and why the term nigger has even become so offensive in American society has more to do with one's culture than one's education. As we will learn in this study, our attempts to avoid the term nigger blinds us from what the term nigger actually refers to. Looking closely at the terms nigger, Negro, and nigger, we begin to rediscover the true identities of our black ancestors and how their royal and divine titles became the degrading racial epithets of those that invaded and robbed them. Looking at the terms nigger, Negro, and nigger from a historical perspective, we begin to rediscover a forgotten black people, a rebellious black people, a skillful and very resourceful black people who white racists began calling niggers and then taught all American-born children that the terms nigger, Negro, and even black and black man were the designations for a subservient, subhuman black person, even a devil. As we will see, it is in the literal definitions of certain culturally rejected words that we begin to see institutional racism more clearly. Of course, we know what the term nigger, N-I-G-G-E-R, means to us as a black community. Collectively, we take such a term as a form of verbal disrespect. We know the intent of racists when such a word is used by them. For many Americans, the word nigger is not perceived as simply a word. It is heard and perceived as a character in American society which defines a person as a subhuman, a degenerate, and even a criminal. Beyond being simply a word, being called nigger by a white person is usually followed by some kind of injustice or violence or rejection or denial of some needed resource in white society. Even beyond any white usage, nigger and nigga in any configuration are still among a controversial group of words offensive to Americans everywhere, especially among Africans in the Americas. Many, if not most, African Americans have had some real unpleasant experiences after having heard the term nigger hurled from the mouths of racists. So let us be clear at the top of this study. In no way whatsoever does this study attempt to make the words nigger, nigga, and or Negro acceptable as designations for Africans in America. Such is totally not the point here. The point here is critical thinking, leading to a real escape from the modern-day effects of institutional racism. Institutional racism and its parent, colonialism, and their real effects on the African-American mind is the point here. Yes, it is right and just for us as a black people to remain adverse to others using the N-words toward us. However, it is when looking critically at the real functions of institutional racism, which strives for the total erasing of our real black ancestry from our collective black memory, we begin to see that by not speaking the term nigger, we also join in on the erasing of those black people called niggers and Negroes historically in the past by Europeans and others. As a black people, of course, we understand the social and cultural implications of the N-words in American society. They are offensive. But as black scholars, by not speaking the term nigger, the real lives, the real dreams, and even the real crimes against those that were called nigger go uninvestigated. Organizations named on behalf of Negroes and information that exalts the achievement of Negroes also go uninvestigated. advice that Negro intellectuals had for us go unheard. As a result, huge regions of our real Black history remain invisible to our collective understanding of ourselves simply because that which you cannot say, or is forbidden to say, is equally not studied or properly investigated. Again, this particular presentation is simply a straightforward tutorial pertaining to how the words nigga, nigger, and Negro have become so controversial and how we are still trained, yes, institutionally trained, to this very day to hate our indigenous Black selves. For the full analysis regarding the N-words and their real connection to modern-day institutional racism, please pick up a copy of the book, Real Niggas, a look at institutional racism through an intellectual analysis of the N-words by KRS-One. Real Niggas, the lesson. In this study, we are looking at the modern-day effects of institutional racism through an intellectual analysis of the N-words, nigger, nigga, Niger, and Negro. Here, we are emphasizing an intellectual approach to the N-words because what we've been hearing from several scholars, celebrities, and intellectuals so far regarding the N-words have largely been different emotional and cultural responses to the N-words, not literal or real etymological investigations of the N-words. An intellectual approach to the N-words, however, is not necessarily an academic approach to the N-words. Too many people confuse intelligence with book learning, that if someone is well-read or can run off a list of facts or has attended a prestigious college, that they are indeed intellectual. This is literally not true. Intellect, as we can see here in the American Heritage Dictionary, is the ability to learn and reason. It is the capacity for knowledge and understanding. It is also the ability to think abstractly or profoundly. Here, we can see that intellect relates to the mind and how it understands. It does not relate solely to books, book learning, or the memorizing of facts. How you apply your mind and what you are capable of knowing determines your level of intellect or intelligence. Here, we see intellectual, meaning of or relating to the intellect, rational rather than emotional, appealing to or engaging the intellect. This is what an intellectual actually is. She or he is first anyone with the ability to learn, led by rational thinking as opposed to emotional feelings only. This is also why our inquiry into institutional racism and its effects on society begins with an intellectual analysis of the N-words and not solely an emotional response to the N-words. From a literal point of view, intelligence is all about the ability to acquire, understand, and use knowledge. Understanding is the mark of a person of extraordinary intelligence. A true intellectual is one that has a wide understanding of things, people, and events. To understand something also means to be aware of the nature and essence of that thing. In its deeper sense, it is the ability to perceive the intention of things, people, and events intimately. Such an ability or mental achievement includes feelings and emotions as well as empathy and sometimes subjective experiences unexplainable in words. But to really understand means to be thoroughly acquainted or familiar with a person, art, profession, skill, subject, event, etc. It also means to be able to practice or deal with a subject or an event or person properly, to apprehend clearly the character or nature of a person or event or subject. Ultimately then, understanding and intelligence are really the same things. You cannot call yourself a true intellectual if all you are capable of understanding is your reality, in your time, in your place, from the pages of the books you have been allowed to read. Real intellectual abilities require more than just book knowledge. They require a certain level of intimacy with whatever is being comprehended. The mind can understand anything, but it is one's personal feelings that decide what the mind is going to know. This is cultural, and most people speak and thus see their world culturally, not literally. They understand according to how they feel, not according to what is actually true or real. One, culture, is not better than the other, literal. But to understand both, institutional racism as well as the origins of niggers' offensiveness in American society, we have to first look at institutional racism as well as the word nigger literally, not just culturally, socially, or emotionally. Yes, the cultural interpretations of certain words and phrases are indeed important to understand. Symbolism is very important in the understanding of intention. But to really get at the foundational disgust for the N-words in American society, again, we have to approach such N-words literally, not just culturally or symbolically or, again, emotionally. It is in the literal definition of words that we get a record as to what the people of a certain time and place saw and experienced. It is not the all of what they saw and experienced, but it is indeed another accurate way of seeing the past through the eyes of those that were there. Most Americans, however, don't speak or communicate literally. We often speak and communicate culturally, according to the understanding of the communities in which we live. The literal definition of the words in which we speak, however, are often saying something quite different than what we are actually speaking. The average person, as an example, will use the word incredible to mean astonishing or great. Most people use and understand the word incredible as a word used to praise something or someone. But literally, the actual word incredible means not credible. Americans use this word culturally to actually give credibility or positive praise to something or someone, but to not be credible is to not be believable. It, incredible, has more to do with being a fake or a fraud. But instead of the word being correctly used to diminish one's or something's believability, it is more widely used to denote astonishment, as in someone or something was so great or amazing that it or they defied belief. It or they were beyond belief, making them or it even more believable. This more cultural use of the word incredible actually gives someone or something credibility or believability. It then becomes good to be called incredible, even though to be incredible means to be not credible or not to be believed. The same can be said of the word denote, as I just used it in reference to incredible. It is more widely used to denote astonishment. However, to denote something really means to not note something or to not mark something. But in common cultural use, to denote something means to mark something or to indicate something specifically. Look at the word terrific in the Oxford English Dictionary. It means causing terror, terrifying, fitted to terrify, dreadful, terrible, frightful. However, in the American Heritage Dictionary, the same word, terrific, means very good or fine, splendid, as well as very bad or unpleasant, frightful. Most Americans speak in this way. They speak according to their cultural and or social comprehension of words, not the literal definitions of such words. This is what has also made the words nigger, negro, and nigga so controversial. It is not the definition and or the etymology of the word nigger that denotes some kind of subhuman social status. It is more of what American speakers culturally think of those associated with this word that has become its meaning. You could be called boy all day by your loving father, but if a racist calls you boy, you could become offended. It's the same word, but it is less about the word being used as it is more about who's using the word. Here, the cultural use of the words nigger, nigga, and or negro shows us that it is the intent behind such words that is more important than the actual words being spoken. Nigger has become a derogatory racial epithet not because of the word itself, but because of who has historically used it and how it has been historically used. This is important to understand because when one nation extends its power over another nation and its people, it degrades that nation. It demeans the importance of such a nation and its people, especially its leadership and the names and symbols associated with such leadership. Whatever the word for holiness is in the indigenous society, such a word becomes equated with evil and the devil in the invading imperial society. In a colonial, imperial society, which begins with the invasion of indigenous people and their lands, anyone considered first and or foreign is deemed the enemy, the criminal, and the devil by the imperial society as a justification for its perpetual robbery and territorial invasion. For those of us that speak English, it is English imperialism and colonialism that has shaped our view of ourselves and of our environment from birth. We speak English, and our speaking of English has us seeing ourselves and our history through English eyes, through English colonial cultural eyes. This is how the crimes of imperialism, invasion, and robbery continue to this very day. It has become the norm. No one really questions the criminality of the colonial presence in the Americas because such a presence and its norms have become established and respected forces in the society and thus receives far less public condemnation. The whole idea of Africans in America having to assimilate into white American society and culture, following white American laws and cultural customs, dressing like white folks, eating like white folks, and ultimately talking like white folks with no other culture in the United States, including white folks, having to do the same toward us Africans, makes it clear as to what we are really living within. Clearly, this is not a democracy. This is something else called white supremacy, where the colonized, us, are taught through white institutions from birth to reject, ignore, and even despise our sovereign ancestral character in exchange for a subservient and obedient colonial character. Exposed to such imperial indoctrination at such young ages, we grow up despising the very character and nature of our own ancestral being. The very words and sounds used by our original culture to describe royalty, divinity, and high intelligence are now taught back to us as evil and subhuman in the same institutions whose founders were part of the imperial scheme to erase the memory of our real ancestors from our minds. In this type of society, the search for one's ancestors and thus oneself does not begin with the accepted terms, titles, and names given to us by the colonial society. Instead, in a colonial-based society, our search for our real ancestors begins with the rejected and degraded terms, titles, and names given to our ancestors by the colonial-based society. It is in the degrading terms and names which English racists hurled at their enemies, our ancestors, that tell us a little more about the real existence and humanity of our real Black ancestors. Not what is produced by Hollywood regarding American slavery and slaves. These are literally made-up stories. But the real Black people that are invisible to white colonial history and thus Black American history. These are who we begin to see more of when we begin to study the real etymologies of the degrading terms and epithets associated with our Black ancestors in English language and culture. Take a look at the words used by colonists to describe ancient Africans: primitives, savages, barbarians, natives, even monkeys and apes. But when you set your emotions aside and look directly at the literal meaning of these words, as well as the beings that such words are referring to, you find that such terms as primitive, savage, monkey, ape, and even slave and nigger are all offensive to us, again, because of the condescending attitudes of who is saying these words, not because of the words or the beings themselves. What we are doing in response to these words is avoiding them because of their European and English cultural interpretations, not because of what these words, literally mean. Here, we can see that we are not responding to knowledge and or truth. We are responding to the character of racists toward us.